Namaste.
Okay, welcome. Tom, how many grace us tonight on Crudcast?
35 minutes. Still bumping up.
Well, welcome all to our live Satsang with Satri. Thank you for joining. Okay. Anybody get wet? Love this weather.
She's a contradiction of terms.
I can't wait.
She gets cheerful when it's gloomy. I mean, it's like,
Put a snow in the mountains. I'm all for it.
yeah. So I so appreciate the Gita. There's a verse in the 16th chapter, right after the revelation of the undivine quality, where Krishna said, "Therefore, Arjuna, let scripture be your guide to understand what is right and wrong. Thus, knowing correctly the scriptural injunctions, you should perform actions in this world." So for me, the Gita is a touchstone. It's a place where I can come back and reference what's arising. And of course, there's always shit arising. So it is really kind of, how do we hold this? How do we be with this? And the reference point. And I'm looking at this and I'm recognizing that as we are now really moving into training people to do this, the work I do, and forming the specific languaging that matches what is the opportunity that this brings. I understand that there's some misunderstanding about what I have used the term true authority. That for me it has meant something, but I realize that in the way I've communicated it, it's created a fair degree of confusion. And I do believe that's we need to come to greater clarity on what I speak of in this conversation. And so there was a quote today when I was reading chapter 15 where Krishna said, the Supreme Being, all right, on this earthly plane, this is verse 566, earthly plane, I manifest myself as two Purushas, the perishable and the imperishable. All living entities are perishable, but the unchanging soul is called the imperishable. So two qualities of imperishability, or one is perishable, two qualities of Krishna manifesting himself as two Purushas. So two types of Purusha he's speaking of. One that perishes, and that's obviously the embodied human being, and one that doesn't, which is our soul that travels through many, many lifetimes, the individualization of the soul, Jivatman. And then he says, the supreme being is other than these two, who as the supreme self is the immutable, all-pervading Lord and upholds and maintains the three worlds. So there's three Purushas, three principles of beingness. Purusha means being. So there's the human being, there's the being, drop the human, just the being, and then there's the supreme being. Okay? Each carries its own authority. The difference is, you might say, there is one true authority, and then there are lesser authorities based on the degree of embodiment, of perishability. Because once you get into perishable, then you get into fear, and then you get into separation, and then you get into survival, and then you get into success. So the whole human being carries all the content of our ego. Okay, what we call our ego. And of course, our ego is nothing but a principle of I amness coded by I am my thought, on my feelings, on my story, on my history. So the ego, the human being, has an authority. It derives from the supreme authority, but it is an authority. And therefore, it reflects something of that true authority of both the being and the supreme being in the ego authority. This is why this is such tricky shit. Because to make a distinction between the human being and the being itself and the supreme being, you really got to travel this territory to really be able to know it, because you can't know it from the human being alone, because you're going to be looking through the filters of that capacity in you that can perceive and know and understand. And even the being will not have the full capacity of recognizing what that authority is, because it's still individualized. Our individual awakened being, or our being freed from the heavy density of our embodiment in a body and a story, the being that we are when we travel between lives, after death, before birth, that being is what travels. And that being carries the principle of I amness that we carry as individual human beings, but without all the content. It carries instead, doesn't carry the body, obviously, but it'll carry subtle impressions and subtle bodies as it travels, like perfumes following the source. That's the great thing about the 15th chapter. It really tells you what it's like between lifetimes. I'll just read that just to diverge a second, because this is what my book. This is the this is just a few verses before 557. A portion of myself has become the eternal soul in this world and draws to itself the mind and five senses, both of which rest in the content of creation. When the Lord departs, that's who departs. We think we depart. It's the Lord who departs. When we drop a body, it's the Lord who drops the body. We just think it's us, right? When the Lord acquires a body, and also when he departs it, he goes taking the mind and the five senses along like the wind blowing perfumes from their source. So we bring the impressions of our embodiment with us as we leave the physical earth plane and we traverse. I see beings, they're just like tadpoles. They have a bulbous head and a tail, like the spinal cord and the brain, and they travel, and then they take on attributes, and they cloak themselves in a subtle body that makes it acceptable for them to be dead and be able to look at themselves in some way or hold some sort of referencing, which you lose a great deal of. You lose a lot when you die, by the way, for the most part. And whatever you haven't been able to let go, there's the opportunity where you get to let go of everything. And then, of course, you then reassemble in a subtle form in some way. But interimly, it's quite a jolt if you're not ready for it. So what we become when we die, it carries also a quality of authority, which when we are newly born, and therefore not with the strong human being component added on us, we carry this naturalness and this immediacy of the authority of the individual being. I'm hungry, I want to eat now. You know, it's just immediacy. It's immediacy. It's immediacy. Whatever the body wants, it wants. It is the body. It doesn't have any distinctions. So it's completely authentic. It's not trying to be anything but it is, right? So that has an authority, and that quality of authority and that quality of innocence, they're related. True authority has an innocence. You could call that innocence authenticity. It's kind of a trueness that resonates with us. Yes, there's the trueness of the baby being miserable and kicking and screaming, and then there's the trueness of the embodied human being kicking and screaming. We can tolerate the child because it's more authentic than the human being, which is everything's a strategy for something else or a compensating structure. So what is the nature? So that's what I thought we could explore tonight. Is the nature of different levels of authority. The authority that comes with the person as an embodied human being, with all the mind and emotions and stories and strategies and rackets. And then the authority that comes from the being. And then what is the relationship of these with that supreme, the nature of that authority? Because I do believe this distinction is very important, because when you come to awaken, you awaken always through your being. The being in you is what can awaken. And then the human gets dragged along like perfumes following the forest, except this is like garbage trucks following the awakened being. Large dumpsters and mounds of shit following with your awakening. All right, so, but at least at the point of awakening, there's a possibility of discovering you truly don't know. But prior to your awakening, you're convinced you're right. And they're idiots. And I know how to do this and they don't. And I know what I want. And this true authority takes all kinds of positions, by the way. It's not just one obvious one is like an exaggerated, overly confident, obnoxious, entitled, arrogant human being who dismisses anything that doesn't fit within his paradigm. Welcome to a description of us, right? We just all have different versions of this. We have much more polite versions than I'm pointing to. So these are divine and undivine attributes that we all create these. We have a sort of a confidence. We have a confidence about our negative sense of self, and we have a confidence about our positive sense of self. We have a confidence how right you are in your suffering and in the rationalization and justification of your wounding. And still ego. It's still an authority. And it's that authority that determines what's real. It's what makes things important or unimportant. It's what assigns value, or lesser, higher or lower, lesser value. So the nature of the authority of you are as the ego, as a human being, you can't dismiss because it's everywhere. It doesn't always come forward, but it's a way someone carries themselves. It's a kind of an organizing principle of the identity that after a while you can get a sense of it. Certainly as human beings, you get a sense of it. If, for example, you're threatened by someone who has arrogance and judgment, then you can recognize that arrogance and judgment is part of their design. You can just feel it in your response because that's your matching issue. Which then you go into your ignorance and judgment about how they are. As Kuna's interacting, Kuna's, as soon as we judge, boy, then you get it. Then it's yours. As soon as you attribute an attribute of repulsion to someone else, welcome, you just met a part of you. But this ability to kind of perceive this organizing principle, because it may not be apparent. They may not carry it all the way to the surface, where the surface is kind of manipulative and slimy and two-faced, and you just get this feeling of something's wrong with this person. It may be subtler. It might be quite an attractive person. It might be the one you love. Of course, it is you. So, and the nature, the insidiousness of the authority that rides with the human ego is what we struggle with. It's the struggle to find it, to meet it once we awaken. Prior to that, it's simply what creates suffering. It's what keeps feeding the compensating structure. It's what keeps playing the story and running the actions and making the judgments. So I was meeting with Scott and Amy. We got the bid in on the studio, and it's right where we had hoped it would be, and so it's quite happy. So anyway, we were talking, and we were talking about the drawings and the architecture, and I was coming up with things that I was from my personality as an ego. And I was wondering how kind of like they just stumble into the conversation. They just kind of stumble into the conversation, like trying to speak knowledgeably. And I didn't really catch it at the time, but I really could recognize it. You know, I can't do this anymore. I am going to have to surrender because, you know, it ain't accessible in a way that makes any sense anymore. So fortunately, I've Scott and Amy to take over the show. But it was a good recognition of how these like skeletons in the closets, you know, these remnants of the personality keep popping up and trying to come into the show in the way they did when they were a human being. And it's the great thing in this work because I keep getting opportunities to meet the remnants, you know, the skeletons in my closet. Personality formations they put together. And I'll tell you, architects is a great, attractive human being ego. And it has that authority, right? That people give to it, even though the guy could just be bullshitting you know, trying to look good, trying to pretend to be an architect. Or a contractor or anything else, you know, whatever role we ended up defining ourselves as, lawyer, you know, therapist. We're all guilty of this. So the nature of the human being is it is a contrived assemblage of pieces and impressions that we put into motion and find out what works and doesn't work. And we do the best we can in terms of what works relative to our importance, relative to our self-interest, relative to preserving and not disturbing the status quo of our adaptation to life. So when we start looking, when we get you awaken, and especially with those of you who are coming to be part of the facilitators training program or the trainers, it is what ego is coming forward, what authority is coming forward. The authority has many things. It has to be right. It always has an explanation and justification and rationalization why it can't do something and why it has to do something and why you should do something. There's probably other options here, which it doesn't even know it's doing. And will speak quite authoritatively. So, and if you don't respond to the authority of a human being in the way it wants you to, then you got trouble. Then it's going to be trouble. Because there's no way I could say, I'm sorry, but I just don't believe that what you're saying is relevant to anything. without doing it from that position of your own entitlement. So if you're in glass houses, it's not good to throw stones. So this questioning and doubting of yourself is something that you can kind of bring forward and keep looking for opportunities to shame and embarrass that part of yourself, welcoming them to make it really clear that it's a skeleton. It's a what you were. And its limited authority was based on principles that were founded on ignorance, founded on conditioning and upbringing and what you believed was true, that was haphazard, that you assembled. You would be really lucky if somebody came up and said, you're a being and you're looking to become a human being. And so you're going to try to understand what it means to be a human being and give you instructions about what to believe about being a human being and what not to believe about being a human being, so that you can be skeptical about any piece of the human life you take on, like getting along with other kids, you know, or beating yourself up because your parents are angry at you. Of course, then they would probably become intolerable children for most parents. They would have an authority senior to their parents' authority. Those are the problem children often. So then there's this, then there is another authority that happens when we awaken. So let's spend a little time in that, in another category. The first, the ego is the perishable. It doesn't last. It's a temporary construct for the 40, 50, 60, 80 years that we live. And then there is something else, another kind of authority that we awaken to. And of course, we don't at first awaken know how to translate that authority into our lived human life. So we're still a human being trying to find out what it is that we've become as just an individual being, an awakened being. So, but we know it feels much better for the most part to be a being instead of a human being. There's a sense of relief and some relaxation, a sense of coming home, a sense of a naturalness and an ease and ability to flow into life in ways, not consistently, but enough so that you can get a sense that there's another way you can be than the human being you're used to being. And eventually that becomes trouble. Eventually the true human being starts letting you know just how screwed up you are as a human being. It just starts being able to perceive the bullshit that you are, the liar you are, the manipulator you are, the con you are, not only the con that you have for other people, but the con you have for yourself. And how you keep taking it for granted that that's the truth. And that becomes the real transformation, the real struggle as the human being, as the being starts coming out of the human being. So the being, in my language, is the what coming out of the who, right? So it starts coming into a more pure and direct recognition of what's true, but it's still for itself. It'll be what's true for me, even if it believes it's what's true for you too, because that would be the coding of the human being. The coding of the human being would prevent the being from knowing it's creating the world the way it appears to. So it doesn't recognize that it's still limited by its very recent contamination, very immediate contamination with your human being. And it's always like a compromise between the human being and the being. Okay, the human being says, okay, I'll let you meditate, but I get to have this. Or the being will say, it depends who has greater authority, right? Because for a while, when the being comes up, when it's up, it's got the authority, but it doesn't know what to do with itself. And it comes back into the human being, and it's got the authority that knows what to do with things. So it's not a favorable situation because you keep losing whatever authority their being has as you try to work out the parts of you that is still invested, identified, attached, desiring, fearful, stressed, anxious. You know, you got a body, you got all that emotional content, you got all that biochemistry and electromagnetic activity going on. So it's really hard for the being to get much authority. It takes years and years, and it takes years and years of developing a collaboration between the being and the parts of the human being that are willing to collaborate. And usually, for most of us Westerners, it's our intelligence. The intelligence is the one that can come forward. It's still part of the ego. And it can say, you know, feeling blissful and peaceful is a better payoff than being right. You know, it starts learning that, you know, this thing that's coming up, it's like worthy to collaborate with because maybe it's onto something that I wasn't aware of before. It's like split personalities. We have many of these fragments. The being is what holds all those fragments together. The human being is what's identified with all these fragments. So the being is the spaciousness. It is the space in which the human being arises. It's the ultimate authority, because without the being, there would just be nothing but thoughts, irrelevant emotions, irrelevant sensations. They would have no relevance from the vantage point of being. It would be just what's arising in the context. But from the human being, it's my feeling, my mood, my mother, my father, my issue, my needing to be right, mine not feeling like I'm making any spiritual progress, mine feeling what's wrong with me or what's wrong with them. It grips you as the being. So the being doesn't have authority yet until it gathers enough information. And that's what it does. It gathers information. And then the ego will then create a new kind of better ego, still coded by the human being, because as long as you're embodied, you're stuck with that. If you awakened and died, yeah, you could drop the whole thing all at once, but you awaken and you're back in the body every time you come down from those moments. And it's a different kind of struggle. And therefore there's this battling of the emerging being from the human being. A battling that's going on between the parts of ourselves that are still hanging on or clinging, we're conscious or unconsciously. The unassumed arrogance, the unassumed entitlement, the unassumed identity associated with your sex, unassumed identity associated with how successful or unsuccessful you were in relationships, and all the rest of it. All of that is the coding that prevents the what from truly being able to emerge enough to get its own authority. That authority in the Bhagavad Gita is the point of no return. And it doesn't come completely free and clear. It comes simply with a greater confidence with the truth of its own beingness when it comes up against the habitual previous truth of its condition. It starts gaining some authority over those adaptions of yourself as a person, and they begin to lose their ability to grab you for very long. They lose their ability to convince you that you did something wrong, or maybe this whole thing is wrong, or whatever would be its story. Until there is a point where, yes, these things will keep arising, but you're just the space in which they're arising. Now, every one of you in the room have different experiences associated with what I'm talking about. This emerging out of yourself in the way you have known yourself before. Now, some of you have been aware of your being from very young, but it didn't have authority. It actually sat to one side while the human being took over and became a person and became acceptable to mom and dad and became effective in the world and so on. And so the being is like a witness, like a subsidiary, like a second little person coming along with you in your life as you fuck yourself up and you keep doing terrible things and you keep repeating the same patterns. And it's just like, it's a good witness, but it has no authority over the human being. See, that's why yoga is like arming the being with tools and skills by which it can claim back the authority it unwittingly has given to this person that it's become. But for most people, the two are intermingled so much, it's not there. But there are many people with me who the being was there all along, but didn't think it had any authority. Looked out there and didn't see anybody like it. And said, I have to be this kind of person. Whatever this is, I don't know, but I can't be like I am. I have to be like them, whatever they be, whoever be the models. A lot of sorrow and grief. It's where we betray our soul. It's where we betray our truth. It's where we compromise. It's where we lessen the truth and the purity and the authenticity of the being, which is true authority. And we don't know how to be that in the world because nobody in the world knows how to be. None of these human beings know how to be beings. Pretty much for sure. Even the beings, awakened beings, pretend they're a human being. So you can't tell right off the gap. Is this actually a being? Or is it one of those human beings? So this emerging of the authority of the being, this is a very important stage. And then without the skill sets that come with yoga or with gathering intelligent information that empowers the being, you will never come to the true authority. It'll always still be a being that's essentially trying to get free from what it was before. So it is a what trying to get free of a who, but it's still in the struggle of not being a who, of trying to come out of the control of the human. Now, it so happens that as we develop skills, and the skill is personal discipline. The skill is that when we effectively apply effort to strengthen our connection to the being and consciously apply effort to diminish the authority of the human being in us, we start gathering a strength when we step out of a witness and we start changing our behavior. When we start taking action that changes the things in our circumstances that keeps reinforcing the human being, and start putting into our life a support for our being to come into existence. Every time the being is able to insert some authority over the human being, it gathers that essential quality of authority. It's like drop by drop by drop by drop. Like the Gita says, just restrain the impulses. They can still act out, but just hold it back some. Instead of killing your partner, or instead of yelling, or instead of being in a sullen mood around them, just withdraw from that agreement with your human being and try something else. Like, hi, honey, glad to see you. Have I told you today I love you? And inside you, oh, the bitch. She did the same thing to get blah, 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 blah. All that's going on. Honey, I'm so happy to see you. Give me a hug. You start developing a new kind of authority that breaks the paradigm that puts you together as a human being. It starts undoing the Rubik's Cube of all the choices and decisions that you made for yourself about what you could do or couldn't do, what was right or wrong, or what was acceptable, or what would not hurt people or offend people. So you might lose their approval or their acceptance or their recognition. So then you begin to gather authority as a human being. So that's the beginning of the ability to be senior to your lesser self, to be able to have the ability to rein in the undeveloped parts of yourself that are still acting out, and to awaken potentialities that haven't actually been brought out in you, so that things that before were completely buried and you were never going to have to meet as a human being can be revealed to you. And you can start meeting those things because they become touchstones for your human being, for organizing the Rubik's Cube of its identity and what it's attached to and what it desires and what it's afraid of and what it feels it needs to control. We're going to be successful and unsuccessful. We're going to be defeated, and then we will defeat. We will win, and we will lose. And it will not always be that once you win, you'll always win. You may win and then lose, and then win, and then lose and lose in terms of this ability to manage this. And part of it just depends upon how apparently painful these remaining structures are for you. The more apparently painful to the human being of its adaptions, of its how it's come along in life, the more ready the ego will be willing to see, recognize, and release those structures. And in the process, then, the intelligence that comes with the human being becomes a collaborator with the being in the unfolding of this kind of new human being, where the human and the being become a collaborative structure, and the parts that work are discarded, and parts that that do work are included. So what doesn't work is discarded. What's included, what does work is included. And what is it that works? It brings you into life more authentically, more purely, more truly, and you know it. And then there's a quality of self-respect that comes out of that process, like a recognition of what's coming up in you. And matter of fact, many people who cry awakening is because of the recognition of the nobility that's just waking up in them. This magnificence that's just waking up in them. And this quality of authentic and being and immediacy and aliveness becomes the continuously strengthening principle of our that allows our identity to shift from the who we are to the what we are. And in that process, as we come out of this embodiment and we become more and more into our own authority, we start opening up to the next level of the being that we are. Now, one part of that is other beings. We start seeing other beings. We start experiencing other beings. We start seeing the nobility and the magnificence in others. Maybe before that, it's only in nature. Human beings you can't see the nobility because you haven't found it in yourself. But when you begin to find it in yourself, you begin to see it in others. When you're able to do namaste to yourself, you can automatically namaste to others. So this ability to be able to be in touch with this as it grows and expands allows us to start getting in touch with qualities of beings that may not actually be on this earth, that actually may be in these domains in which beings travel and live and experience and operate way just like human beings do, each having different roles and positionalities and reference based on the matrix of the creation and its particular mission and its particular expression. And many who are human beings who come out of the awakening, they will also carry certain capacities and inclinations from their human lives. So you start meeting these wondrous domains, and many of them will come and be so happy that you're joining them. They'll say, "Oh, let me help you. Let me give you a little peace. Let me give you a little strength. Let me give you some information. So let me show you what it is you've become." And so this is this domain of where we are still being, but we're beginning to meet these universal beings that are bigger, more expanded than our little relatively newly awakened being. And we are in awe. We see in them the same kind of magnificence we see in ourselves, but enhanced multiple times because it's pure, it's more developed, it's more full. And they carry another quality of being that wasn't available to you before. a more pure, a more authentic, a more real, a more satisfying and immediate connection with existence than what you were able to ever encounter, even as an awakened human being in your physical existence. And this is the third phase. This is the middle kingdom. This is the opening up into this collective field that we operate in. Now, often, simultaneously, we'll also meet the universal archetype structure that we still carry within us as we open. It's not just above, it's also below. So you'll also meet the ship pile, and you'll meet it in ways that will let you see that it's not so much personal, that you because you took a birth, you took on a much bigger landfill than than you thought was yours. You're just a fraction of this that is in the collective consciousness. And that's where we begin to expand what we are in such a way that starts including the human. It is when we can, in our being, meet these things from that more, with that greater authority, that we can begin to heal and reorganize the human being into a reflection, like building a new kind of person, a new kind of operating principle that can still function and go to the grocery store and fill the car with gas and pay its bills. But it's a new kind of coming into existence that's more authentic, more natural. Of course, you have to train it. It's like being a newborn baby, having learned to walk. It had to learn to use the body. Well, it's this way too. It's just the reverse. The ego has to learn how to use the being, and the being will help it learn how to be a better ego. So the ego starts integrating, starts transmuting. It starts becoming something that has a quality of authority that is immediately recognized by other beings. And this is where the spiritual teachers, depending upon wherever they are in that emerging, start showing up. It doesn't mean you're done. You're still the imperishable individual being, but you've expanded. You've become more inclusive. You come out of the box of what defined you by your sex, by your culture, by your upbringing, by your story. You become this more expanded kind of person. And in that, the universe starts showing you all the other possible variations of you that are out there. They'll bring them to you. They'll bring you someone who is your mother, someone who is your father, and they'll be coming to you to seek healing. They'll be coming to you to heal the things that you've been relatively successful in healing with yourself, but now the universe is requiring you to go deeper. So it could be seemingly like attacks, like traps, seductions, new areas by which the old ego can get tangled up in this new quality of being. So this is why that whole middle kingdom is so fraught with multiplicities of high and low, good or bad, right or wrong, divine and undivine. So it's very difficult from the being to be able to sort out what's true, what's not true. Just like it was for the human being to be able to sort out after the awakening what is true and what's not true. So we have to grow into this domain. And as we grow into this domain, we start contacting beings that are more and more pure, more and more true, more and more in authority. And their authority will always be a reflection of their purpose. It'll be their role. It'll be the position that they fulfill for the unfolding of the opportunity of human existence. So there is a part of us that will bow to that, will surrender to that recognition of a greater authority. It's the being in us who will bow, and even the human in us will learn to bow to that magnificence as it unfolds. This is where the gurus come. This was the great teachers come. This is where, we begin to discover there's a matrix in which all of this is occurring, discovering the rules of existence. This is the points where at one point, the identity, which was before strongly associated with a human being, is now learned to become associated with the being is now shifting into this higher, more expanded, more true, more pure, more authentic quality of being, so that for moments you know you're divine. In moments you know you are truth. For moments you know this huge love, this huge compassion, this great willingness to give of yourself for a purpose larger than itself. It's inspired and uplifted. So in those moments, we get glimpses of our true authority, the supreme authority. Until then, the human being is being lifted up. When the being comes to its authority, the human being's lifted up some, but when the being opens up to this next dimension, the human being can be lifted up to collaborate with that new capacity of being. And that's the work we're doing right now. The facilitators training program and the trainings program is about working with the human being so that it can expand enough to include this expanding being, which is becoming more and more like the supreme being. And then to give it a means of accessing the supreme being as a human being. Simplicity, silence, and stillness. Teaching the body to be simple, silent, and still. Becoming capable of holding that spaciousness that you become when you are able to quiet that endless restlessness of the human adaptation in your body. And there becomes a space starts forming in you, an openness, a freedom, where something starts coming in. First, it seems like it's coming in, and then you discover it's coming through. So this is then you become, the human becomes a means by which these higher beings and ultimately the supreme being can come through you into existence. It creates a bubble in the field of you, wherever you are physically. It creates a field of greater authenticity, of greater truth, of greater immediacy. And you become the authority of that field, even if it doesn't feel like it is. You people will come and find you, and they will assign authority to you, even if the habit of you would dismiss it and not think it matters, or would not maybe even notice. So that's the other part of the training is the fact that when you come to this stage, to begin to notice how you're impacting the world around you, to begin to watch how people respond to you and how through you, they are able to access their own being more fully or their own supreme nature more fully. So this capacity to channel will first, of course, be with this very still imperishable being, still a form of individualization, but begin to tap into this quality of the supreme being. That is the essential principle that holds the context for all of existence to come through you and into existence. And this is what I am teaching those who are holding space for groups to do. That by linking up through me to that principle of the supreme being, that principle can enter in through your expanded being, through your individual being, and through your human being to whatever space is arising that you're holding. So when you create a space for the Gita study group, then you create a space for the language of the supreme being. And by holding that space, the supreme being then can come through you and create a quality of beingness that the being or the supreme being in each of the people in the room can start speaking through them, to them, bringing forward that into existence. It's very hard to penetrate from the expanded being to the supreme being because you're going beyond all Shakti, all bliss, all that you've known up until that point. You're going into a domain of the absolute, which has no reference point and can be deeply frightening to the human ego, deeply disturbing to the human ego. So when you can have help, when you can have something that can come down and assist that part of you to be able to come into existence, your authority, whatever confidence you have in that authority that you come to, is enhanced through your willingness to surrender yourself into that moment, to simply be the space for whatever is going to be arising. So that's the opportunity, is to hold the space and actually hold back from filling it with unnecessary content, to let the Supreme Being come in. And it may take time, so you have to be silent. You may have nothing happening in the group, but it creates a tension in the group that tends to bring that principle forward. And like popcorn, when it gets hot enough, it'll start popping. And this is what happens. I listen to almost all the small groups, all the study groups, and I can just listen to it happening, and I can see who is really more able to do this than others. And it's not necessarily who you think it might be, or at different times having greater capacity than at other times. And what is that? Well, then we actually bring in, we bridge the gaps and between matter and spirit, between asat and sat. Even though ourselves as individuals, we're still in the process of purifications, we're still in the process of creating a discrimination that is based on truth rather than based on programming and habitual structures and remnants of our ancestral karma, or our organization as a woman, or our organization as a man, or even as a spiritual seeker. All of these things are distortions when it comes to that principle. So what I look to bring forward in the facilitators program is this true authority. And it can only come through whatever authority you have. It'll be your true authority. It'll be your true authority as a person, your true authority as a being, depending upon where you are in your own development. And what it is that makes this work is your consciously surrendering your authority at whatever level it is. Ultimately, surrender goes beyond trust or distrust, suspicion, cost-benefit ratio, what I'm going to get out of it. It becomes as something else. And that's what the Mother Book speaks of. When you choose to surrender, what chooses in you to surrender is whatever capacity of authority you've been able to come to out of your human embodiment, aligned with the being, aligned with the unfolding possibility of what that is. So we're all three Purushas, if we know it or not. We're all three of these expressions of authority, and periodically, once in a while, true authority will come through you once you're awakened as a being. But until you know that is you, all you can do is hope for the discernment to recognize, is it my authority or is it this? And you're not going to know. You're not going to know. This is why the Satguru is so important. The Sadguru is so important because the Sadguru is conscious of what they've become. Guru means you've gone beyond the three gunas, not the layman use of guru, which is teacher. But the true guru is beyond the three gunas. Therefore, they have come to varying degrees in effectiveness to the supreme authority, to the supreme being. They may not be able to fully demonstrate it, but they will be able to bring a quality of that through them into those who come to them sincerely. So if you surrender to the force that comes through the Satguru, not worry about the form or the dogma or the teaching, but to the force, then you can have a direct means by which you can come to your own true authority. That's the opportunity. I'm not speaking anything new, but it has been clouded. It has been covered over with rules and languaging and misconceptions and adaptions over hundreds, thousands of years. And in this way, it's very, very startling that such a thing can actually be something brought down into existence in such a way that it can be language. It can be a structure. It can have rules. It can have guidelines. It can have a languaging. It can have a teaching that can take the best parts of your awakening human ego and enhance its ability to discern the nature of what is true and not true, so that that greater immediacy, that greater love, that greater capacity to be, to exist, to know, can keep growing in you. With that, the endless unfolding of the purposefulness of everything. And then you're free. Even if you're still in a body that will die, that's perishable, even if that part of you that's a human ego is still kicking around, behaving poorly some days, it will drop with the body. It's the personality that we identified with, which came with the body. We fed it, we made it, we assembled new parts to it, we aggregated it. But when we die, it goes to the trash heap like all other bodies, junkyard. And then whatever we have been able to bring forward will be so much more distinctly manifest. Okay, well, there you go. There it is. Yeah. All right, it's useful to understand the nature of this and how do we get to this? We keep getting simple. We keep learning to take action without investments in outcomes. We keep learning to let go and to take the time to rest within that original nature that we are, to keep designing our lives so that our being is supported, empowered, in fact, in its ability to come to its interim true authority as a means of growing into what will ultimately be the absolute authority. And the only difference is the extraordinary effectiveness of the absolute authority. It creates miracles. It intervenes in thousands of years of karma. It changes cellular structures. It changes the possibility of people's life within a few months or years, where otherwise it would be lifetimes. Yeah, okay. She's my manager. All right, so let's. I think we're done for tonight. Is that correct? 8 o'clock. All right, so we'll just have a 10-minute silent sitting. You can all dwell on this and chew on this, but yes. So we'll turn down the light. And I believe we'll have another satsang in Thursday too.
Is it public? Yeah.
Okay, off we go. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat Shri. Glory to good heaven. Amen.